In this section, we're going to cover how collections are used in Backbone.js. And the way I like to think of collections is like this. If a model is sort of like a row in a database table, then a collection is your entire database table with multiple rows in it. Except we're talking about objects here, so your model is your object. Maybe it's a person object, maybe it's a bottle of wine, and you have multiple bottles of wine in your collection, and so you might want to query and pull back certain bottles of wine and loop over them and display them inside of your application. So in our first example, collection 01, we are going to define our model, and then we are going to define our collection of plural wines, and inside of that we set two attributes. We set what the model is for that collection, and that model is going to be just one instance of wine, and we also set the URL parameter. And the reason we do this is because if you don't set what the URL is going to be when you do an add or a create, or specifically when you do a create, Backbone is going to try and hit a RESTful endpoint to pull that data or persist that data on somewhere on your server. But we don't have the back end set up yet, and in fact, by the time we get to StackMob, we won't need that URL parameter anymore because StackMob will take care of all your back end needs. But for right now, for this example, we need to have that URL there set to a £sign so that we don't have any errors pop up in the JavaScript console. So if I go over and go back to my browser, I can click on collection 01, and of course the screen remains white. We don't see anything there. But I know that there is a new collection there, but there's no instance yet. So I'm going to actually define a new instance. You'll notice I use uppercase when I'm defining my class, whether it's like my model or my collection, but when I create an instance of that model or collection, I use lowercase. That's just a common convention. So I'm going to say wines equal new wines, and I'll just close that off and hit enter. And now if I do wines to JSON and I hit enter, what I get back is an empty array. So you'll remember with our models, we were getting back a JSON object, but with a collection, we are getting an array of JSON objects. So right now there's nothing in there, so it's an empty array. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to manually add my first wine in there. So I'm going to say wine, and then I'm going to pass in a JSON object with a name of Robert Mondavi. Oops. And there's my JSON object, and I say wines.add, and now it's added. And now if I do wines to JSON, I actually see we have one object inside of our array, and I can expand to see what that looks like. And if I want, I can go in here, and I can add a different wine. So now we've got two in there, and when I do my wines to JSON, I now have two objects in my array. So that's how we work with our initially just creating a new instance of our wines collection and adding an item to our collection. So here I am with collections number 2 example. I'm actually going to create my instance inside of my code, and I will define my first two objects that I want to add to my collection. So you can actually pass in an array of objects when you initialize your wines, and that will actually populate your instance for you right off the bat, and then I'm sending it out to the console log. So I'll go back here, hit the back button, I'll go to collection 2, and you can see down in the console I've got my two objects being output here. And if I want, I can go ahead and add another wine there, And if I output it, now I have 3 objects being displayed inside of my array, which is my collection. Now I want to look at the concept of looping, and this is where you'll see Backbone is leveraging the _.js library to give you this nice way to loop over each item in your collection. So in the blue there you'll see we have wines.each, and what I'm doing is I'm looping over all the wines in my collection, and I'm calling an anonymous function and passing in one argument, which is my model. And from the model I can then do model.toJSON or model.get and pass in an argument for the attribute that I want to pull out of my model to display. So if I go back here and I click on collection 3, we'll see that my 3 items have been output here, or my 2 items have been output into the console log for my 2 wines in my collection. And here's our 4th example for collections. In this example, we are creating an empty collection, and we're setting a listener for an event. We're saying if there's an add event, then we want to output a message saying that the collection has changed. For the first wine, we're going to add Clos Pegase, and so we'll create an instance called first wine, and then we'll do wines.add, and we'll pass in that new model. So you can pass in the string literal for your object, for your model, or you can actually declare your model object and then pass in just that variable called first wine. Either one works. So I'll go back here and I'll go to collections 4, and you can see it immediately tells me that my collection has changed because I've actually added that first wine in there, the Clos Pegase. So if I say wines to JSON, we can see we've got 1 item in our collection. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do something. I'm going to go in and change my my code a little bit here. I want to listen to 2 different kinds of events. I want to listen to the add event, and I want to listen to a remove event. And in both situations I want to trigger the same message that the collection's changed. Now I'll go back to my browser and I'm going to do a refresh. And again, if I output it, I can see that I've got 1 item in there. Now let's go ahead and let's create a new let's go ahead and grab the first item in our object here. Actually, we're going to add an item first. Let's do that. Let's add a new wine. So I've added a wine. It tells me I've changed my collection. If I output it, I've got 2 objects in my collection, Clos Pegase and Sterling Vineyards. And now I'm going to go and I'm going to grab the first wines out of there. And I can do that by saying, get me the wine at the 0 position in my array, and assign it to a variable called first. Alright, so now I can actually say, show me what is inside the first variable. Inside there is actually my model object. So now I've got my model object pulled out of there and a representation of it. And now I can say wines.remove, and I can pass in the variable first, and that will remove the wine from the collection, which will then trigger our message to display that the collection has changed. And now if I go and pull up wines to JSON, we'll see that only Sterling Vineyards is left, and the Clos Pegase has been removed from our collection. So that's working with collections, seeing how events get triggered, and when you add and remove items to the collection, that will trigger an event. And this is something you're going to see later when we start looking at views, and how views will listen for changes in collections so that we can then update our view automatically without having to be told to update it. We'll just be listening for changes in the collection.